Hello, and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We talk everything animation here, including Infinity Train, Book 2, which we'll be talking about today. I'm your host, Alex Bonilla, and today I'm joined by Michelle Andrewer.
Hello.
And Sarah Potter.
Hi.
You can find more about our podcast at overlyanimated.com, including our previous discussion on Infinity Train Book 2, a more general discussion. Today, we will be doing a revisit of the Book 2 that was released in a week on Cartoon Network earlier this month. But also, we'll be diving into certain topics of identity, as evidenced by Lake in this show. But first, because Michelle and Sarah were not on the first podcast, we'll begin with the general thoughts about the season before we dive into specific things. So, and I already gave my thoughts on the initial podcast, so I won't be commenting here. But Michelle, let's go to you first. How are you feeling about Infinity Train Book 2 in general?
Oh man, I didn't expect so many things I was invested in learning about to happen so soon. I feel very vindicated just in terms of the sketchiness of the train and what the purpose of all the things on the train are, and just like people's autonomy and like what the lessons mean and how the system is inherently flawed, and it's just great. And all I can think is season 3, they're going to have to try to destroy the train or something, because clearly the train is not doing 100% great job at whatever it's attempting to do. And that's like a big thing. So like that aside, I love following MT/Lake this season. Jesse is a very sweet boy and he grew on me a lot. And I love their dynamic together. Alan Dracula, when I first saw Alan Dracula in the promos, I was like, this is nightmare fuel, because they had this shot of him with like the long limbs and his like head goes up really far to get a leaf, and I was like, oh no, and his name is Alan Dracula, what does that mean? But he's also wonderful and I love him so much. This season felt a lot more epic, and maybe it's just because we already have the initial background of the train and the process of, like, we all know what the train's for now. And so digging into, like, a character that wants to get off the train, but the train doesn't want her to go off, and her struggling with her identity, like, all that stuff is so much more interesting and felt really wonderful to have, because again, like, we've only had 10 episodes before this season, but I feel like we got so many more answers to things this season than I was expecting, and that was really wonderful. So I feel like I really liked season 1, and I like even more like season 2, just because like I'm on the same page with Infinity Train now, finally, and I'm just like ready for whatever they have next. But like I was very impressed with this season overall.
Nice. Yeah, on the first podcast, I think we referenced your take from season 1 on the sketchiness of the train. So
that's the thing, right? Because like initially I was like, oh no, like I feel like such a jerk saying all these mean things about the train. But then season 2 happened. It was like, oh no, like we knew though that was the plan. We're gonna talk about it now and how it is like not okay. Yeah, I was so vindicated. And one even is like when Jesse comes back, he's like, what is he doing back? We fixed him. I'm like, how dare you assume you can just fix people's one problem and their lives are fine? I was just like, that audacity game. But again, it felt like the show is so aware of what that means, and it doesn't believe that for a second. And it forces you to really think about that. And I love that we're getting it finally. So, like, I'm totally on board with the train now. I'm not mad at all. This is great. I'm so happy we're here.
All right. All right. Sarah, then now let's go to you. What are your general feelings about Book 2 and Infinity Train?
So I think all you really need to know is that Chrome Car was my favorite episode of season 1. Mm-hmm. I loved it. It was a self-contained little thing, like all the episodes are, but I mean, like, even more so, like, it was about meeting this reflection of Tulip and how they felt like didn't have an identity, agency, and like it even ends with, or it even like incorporates this idea of like, she's her own person. She doesn't have a name. She doesn't have like, and Tulip acknowledges that and goes like, I can't pick your name for you. And it feels so empowering, just this whole story of just someone realizing they don't have an identity or aren't being the person they want to be and trying to figure out how to take that next step. And this whole season is really just that next step. It's one step. And I'll get into that when we talk about MT/Lake in more detail. But like MT's journey is just so good. And I just love how they really incorporated Jesse into it. Like Jesse, like I was very, not like I didn't think I'd like Jesse, but I really like that he is the secondary main character to Lake's first. I was really worried that Lake would be the secondary main character to Jesse, and it was not the case. Jesse was there as a foil to Lake and a foil to her way of dealing with problems and dealing with who she believes she is. And I think they're really shown as opposites in a lot of ways, but also showing that they want very similar things in very, very, like in very different situations. And I just really, I don't know. This season just hits so many really high notes for me and so many notes that I just feel like you're gonna get it in this podcast, like how many notes they hit. And I want to preface this pod just by saying like I'm probably gonna say some negative things, and I'm gonna make it clear that the negative things I'm saying are more about society and not about the creators of this show and this season in general. Because I love this season and I think the creators did a great job. But there's just some crappy stuff in the world, and it just upsets me. So I just want to make sure that's clear going in. Like, I want to make sure that the negative things I say aren't being misconstrued as I don't like this season, because I absolutely adore it.
Okay. And yeah, I'll be, as we go through this discussion, I'll be interested in hearing from you guys, like how much connection there is to real world circumstances with certain things that happen in this show, because there's a lot going on. And there's a couple of different places that I guess we could start this. But Sarah, you mentioned it when you're talking about the Chrome car, like one of the things brought up even in that episode is the idea of names, right? And in book 2, that is a theme that begins from the very first episode. You got MT immediately being resistant to being called the Chrome Girl by Jesse, and then as it goes on, she continues to chafe at being called a Null, being called a Sliver. At the very end with 1-1, she has the whole monologue, like, I'm not any of the hundreds of names you want to give me. So throughout that is a particular thing of refusing to accept the identity that society wants to put upon you based on your superficial view, right?
Which is done great in this season. Like, I also think that the names thing, like, they definitely equate the name stuff to labels in general, and the idea of I definitely struggle with that, where it's like, I don't want to be labeled things by other people, but it's like, I'm claiming a label, like, this is what I feel like. Just saying that I'm a woman is a label. Like, it doesn't feel like one because we use it every day, but it's still a label and it's still a thing, and it's a conflict. And I think that they show that with Lake, where it's like she wants a label, but the labels that she's given aren't the ones she likes. And it's a very interesting dynamic through the whole season.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, I don't know how you feel about how it handles the situation of being assigned names versus getting to choose the name and the process of that. So do you have any thoughts to contribute to that?
I mean, I agree with everything Sarah said. And I think for me, the naming is definitely a huge part of her finding her identity, but also the question of her autonomy as a person is called into question a lot.
Yes.
And that was the part that I was really fascinated about, because even though I do have all this vindication about the train being sketchy now, I have a new concern about if the train is creating all these things that are being colloquially referred to as nulls, how much autonomy do they have? In addition to like Lake, who got out and can have a real life now.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge moral question. And I like don't know how to feel. But I think what this season did so well is just focusing on, Lake herself and deciding that like maybe in a way just speaks for a lot of the other people / creatures that are on this train that are serving purposes only for the passengers and helping them learn and grow. And I mean, like, even like the toad, I feel like that's one of the more egregious examples of just like this system is not good for everyone.
No,
and it actively hurts some of the things on the screen.
Like I think the frog is a great example. Like, it's literally made to hurt him. But I really like that you like brought up that stuff you brought up with the how the trainers want them to be like who they want to be or be free even, because it's just like it really feels like, especially in episodes 9 and 10 and a little bit of 8, it really feels like the train is supposed to be an allegory for just our society saying like, you have to be this person, you are this person, and it makes sense that you can't do this. And like, I think the allegory is not supposed to be saying like you can't do whatever you want. It's supposed to be saying like there's always something in your life that you can't do according to society. You can't be something. And they're really channeling that here. And I really think it gets across well, just like the frustration of Lake being like, I want to be this, and I feel like I'm already this. Why can't I just be it? Why can't I just say I'm this?
Oh, absolutely.
And the train is just constantly saying, no, you're not blank, you're null. And it just, I mean, we're drifting towards it, like we're kind of dancing around it, but it very much feels to me like this whole thing, it very much feels shrouded in a lot of trans dialogue and a lot of trans and gender nonconforming dialogue. Like, it just feels very, very intertwined with that.
Well, we can dive into that further if you want to. Like, are there any other examples that?
I mean, I think we're gonna dive into it as we go. I don't think there's a lot to go into, like, just like talking about trans rights and stuff. Like, obviously, like, I want to talk about it, but I feel like it's better to talk about it through the lens of the other things we're gonna talk about anyways.
Well, we can transition a little bit into like the, as Michelle mentioned, like the autonomy of the Nulls and MT herself trying to break out, because I do think there's also like something powerful in the idea of this train is setting rules for every single individual in this train. So what happens when it's very restrictive. Yeah. So what happens when someone wants to break out of that role and society tells them, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's wrong. And you have to fight through everyone's rejection. Like at one point in the Lucky Cat car, like she says something along the lines of everything and everyone in this train wants me to fail, because in reaction to like being treated less preferentially than the humans. Like, she knows that the society is stacked up against her, and that is something that anyone with an identity that drifts from your cis knowledge, like that's the uphill battle that everyone has to fight. And I think that MT's experience, especially in the second half of the season, represents that really well with regards to fighting against the structures that exist.
Yeah, hard agree.
Sorry. I like. I'm not. It's not that I disagree with you. It's just like there's just a lot to unpack there.
I mean, there is a lot,
and it's like hard to say like, and that's why I wanted to give that warning before. That's like we're going to talk about some negative things, and it's not like reflecting on the show at all. Like, the show like really does a great job of showing just how crappy real world is. Like, this is just how it is. People, even when you don't know you're ready for a change, like even when, like, so for example, the thing where this becomes like really hard to make an allegory is that unlike, say, like a queer person or a trans person, gay, straight, like gay or like bi or whatever you are, the difference is this is unequivocally like a worse thing where she was before. Like, because she was trapped in a mirror and she had no autonomy whatsoever. And so it does create this situation where you, the audience, 100% are like, yeah, it's better for Lake to be free. Like, it's 100% better for Lake to have a body and to not be, like, trapped with Tulip all the time. But it does mean that, like, it's a lot more just, it's a lot clearer and a lot easier to draw that line and say, yeah, this isn't okay. And you need to draw that same line and say, this is what it feels like. It feels like, for me, Tulip is like, this is why it also like feels very trans. It's like, essentially like Lake was trapped inside Tulip's body, like trapped in a body that wasn't hers. And that's a very big emotion that I can relate to. A lot of people can relate to in the trans community, and just being like looking in the mirror and being like, this isn't me I'm looking at. I'm on autopilot. I'm doing my own thing. And I just think that that's the way they're really going with it, that they're really going the very literal route here of just Lake was trapped in another person's body. Now she's free and she can do what she can be the person she wants to be. And it feels like it's worse than it feels like it's a worse thing than a lot of trans experiences. But it's really not. I could attest the feeling of it is very similar. It's obviously I wasn't trapped and couldn't do anything, but it just feels that way forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Chrome car, especially that episode, especially gets that across, right? But it does leak into the first half of this season as well. When
I hope that was connected to what you said. I was hoping I stayed connected. It's hard to there's a lot of tangents to go off on.
No, but it fits with the idea of you're dealing with society wanting to put you in a role, and so it's tough when you feel trapped in something that in the effect of being trapped in a body that you don't want to be in, let alone in just a vague societal role.
And it can be just more than a body. It can be presentation things. I know that there's a lot of guys I know, a lot of them who I know wish they could wear clothes that were different than the ones they have, but it's just society's a lot more okay with women wearing men's clothing than men wearing women's clothing. And that alone is really frustrating and really stupid. And I think that's alone a huge problem. And it can be as small as that, where it's I'm not presenting exactly the way I want. And I think everyone can kind of relate to that, the presentation thing. And I really just love how this season captures that feeling. I keep saying it, but they really captured it. I feel I know that I am closer to these emotions than some people, but I feel it captured it for an audience for people that don't live through the thing I lived through.
Yeah.
I think part of what makes that so effective this season is also that MT is so verbally relentless whenever somebody gives her the wrong name or assumes she is a thing that they want to prescribe her as, and she's always no, that's not me, no, that's not me, no, that's not my name, I am a person, don't tell me where I'm supposed to be, I'm gonna decide where I'm gonna be. And that happens, I feel literally every episode, and I think that's such a relief to see too, because the consistency helps the message feel more genuine.
And I want to be clear, if she didn't, she would still be just as valid. But it's important for a show to be this is what she's thinking. And it makes her character so fun to watch to just be she's just no, that's not me. And I love that I think the drag show car, one of the best examples, she's I'm not doing this. I'm not being this person that I'm not. And it really comes across. She doesn't want to perform as someone she's not ever. And that's, I think, shows and explains why she can't do it. And they embrace that. The drag car is just we get it. You don't want to pretend anymore. And I think that's a good message to show that, if you want to pretend, that's fine. But some people are pretending all the time and they're done with it. And it's just there's so much I also want to be clear, if you run into someone trans or someone like this with a similar issue to the one that they're really getting to with the core of this season, and they don't do what Lake does and gets mad about it, I promise you they are mad and they are frustrated and they do want to do all these things Lake is doing, but they just don't, because the society stuff we were talking about earlier, you just can't.
And that's the thing, when either you or Alex, I'm sorry, I forget who was saying before about, the line that MT has when she's the train, wants me to fail, basically. And I think that's why it's so nice that she's, literally fighting that every episode. And every time it's brought up, it's so consistently there. And I feel that's really affirming in a way, too.
They really, they really put to, I get, that's a really good way to put it. They really, they made the struggle of it is a fight just to make people be I'm a woman, my name's Sarah, she, her pronouns, and they're really making that fight a physical thing in this season, a thing you can point to. And just because I'll admit, it doesn't feel like a fight, but it is one against the system. I have to get my name changed, and I have to prove to a judge that my name is Sarah now. I have to prove to a judge that I'm a girl now. I have to prove all these things, prove to get medical help that I need. And it's just but that proving is a lot less, it doesn't feel like a fight in the classical term, but Lake's struggle is a fight. She has to fight everyone in her way. She has to fight the mirror police that are essentially they're just cops. To be honest, they're just cops. I'm not going to get into that too much, but it's not good. And I don't know. I really like that. That's just a like you said, Michelle. It's just a really physical take on that struggle,
and it's so prominent. I mean, the prominence you just feel so intentional. I can't imagine that's not for a reason. Yeah,
it feels like I'm not one to put like pronouns on someone, but it feels like it feels appropriate and feels right that at this point Lake would be like really like, because this season was about Lake physically fighting for who she is. It feels like now that she's out, she would take time to like actually sit down and be like, who am I? What does Lake actually mean? Who is Lake? And I think that that's an important step to take. And I would not be surprised if at the end of that journey she does not think that she is either a girl or at least fully a girl. I would not be surprised at all based on what we've seen of her this season.
And there is one part in the middle of that I latched onto, that somebody like cited that she's like fighting to be her own person, and that is a line that comes up a lot, especially near the end of this, where she has to literally tell people, "Look, I'm a person. Look at that scene at the end of episode 9, where like she is literally being treated as an invisible thing, like to the robots, and like,
oh my god,
I am a person. And like that part, especially his part, in terms of, you have your particular issues that make you different, and people just want to ignore that. It's I mean, Sarah, if you want to,
it just. No. I 100% agree, obviously. Like, this is just, like, again, this and her reaction, like, trying to, like, just destroy the system and it doing nothing. Like, this is just another, like, physical representation of this idea of, like, people want to pretend or want to claim I don't exist. And, like, there's no argument on my part to, like, there isn't an argument here. Like, clearly Lake is a person. There's not an argument for her to have, and she has no like, she can't form an argument with one to how she knows she's a person, because she just is one. And it's just, I think they captured the absurdity of it so well that, like, clearly Lake is a person, and clearly Lake deserves happiness just because she is a person. And it hits really hard. Just the shot of her, like, she can't believe that the world is like, because like I think she like inherently believes up until that point that like even if the people of the world, even if there's people that believe she's not real, she thinks the system, like the inherent system of the world, like the value structures or the physics of it, will say that she's real. And the sad truth is, in the real world in there, that they don't either. Like,
in the world of the train, absolutely.
In the real world, there are a lot of places that don't either. I'm just saying, like, it depends where you live. It depends where you live. But we don't need to go into that as much. But, like, this train definitely just says, no, you're not real. And it's just really powerful that they get that. Like, I can't believe that they captured, like, I think that they say a lot of these things really overtly. They don't like say it like in any real subtlety or anything, but it works so well because it's just so genuine and so honest, and so, it feels so real.
Alex kind of broke my brain a little bit when he was talking about the feeling invisible, because like I do believe Lake's sense of identity is pretty specifically like queer and non-cis, but also like, again, because I can't stop thinking about all the other Nulls on the train, and
I know we have to help them.
One really diabolical thing about Infinity Train as a train is like, there's this priority of life that comes in and out that gets to use everything else not as it pleases, but just like to help it grow and progress at the expense of everything else. And like in a way that just like, that feels like such a way of just showing like, who are the most privileged people in our society?
What you're saying, Michelle, what you're saying, Michelle, is the trade is capitalism.
Well, the system is set up to help the already privileged.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like the idea of like her having to prove her humanity because she's not the kind of person the train is used to giving its attention, time, and like humanity too. And like that's the majority of people in the world.
Yeah, and also like
it just shook me to my core, and I was like, oh my god. Yeah.
And like it goes with like the fact that she's also like, I think you're getting at this, the fact that her skin is not normal.
Yes, I'm getting
And you know what my point about this is, Michelle, so I'll save it for a little bit later, but I'll let you finish.
I'm just that I feel like the train has to be destroyed. I just
You're saying 1-1 should have stopped Lake.
When I first saw how 1-1 was acting this season, I got so upset, and I was like, 1-1, what's wrong with you? And then I just realized, like, he's not the train, but he is the conductor, and he's just like, he's drunk in the Kool-Aid, and he believes all these things.
I think it's more than that. It's showing that, like, good people can be sucked into, like, this idea of, like, I don't know, like, whatever you want it to be, the patriarchy, the authority, whatever you want it to be, you can get sucked into the ideas of the train and be good and be, like, a moral person and still hurt people because you're just doing what's best for you, which is not unfair. Like you should look out for yourself, but at the same time, it's hurting a lot of people, and it's hard to like justify that.
And it's even hurting like the people it's supposed to be helping. Like, I can't get the fact that the train assumes people are just gonna have one problem, come in and out, and they'll never see them again. And it's just like closed books. We fixed them. They're all better now. Like, that is not how people are. So I feel like, how can this train keep doing what it's doing with no ramifications? I just can't see that happening at this point.
And I talked to you about this too, Michelle, where it's like the train, what it actually does is it like helps them with the first step. It gets them to the first step of realizing what is wrong. What is something you need to change? And I think the train thinks it is just fixing people, which it's not.
It's not at all.
Like, I talked to you about this, and this is kind of like the big moment of the season when, if it's okay, Alex, can I move on to like the scene where Lake is reflecting the number on the hand? Because I think that's like the biggest scene in the entire show. It's this, and it's just like, there's so much symbolism here and so much implicit, like, meaning to this, because I'm again going to relate this to like a trans journey and journey, like just that, 'cause that's what I'm relating it to in general, because it's hard not for me to. And it's like, when you're starting your journey, when you want to change yourself, when you want to be the person you really want to be, as much as it pains you, as much as it hurts, you have to accept where you're starting. You have to know where you're starting. You need to, like, this is part of the trans journey you don't really talk about. People have to settle a little bit. They need to know what kind of results they can actually get. They need to be realistic. And because some people won't pass, or they won't look the way they want to look. But that first step, but the thing is, they're still happier at the end. They're still happier people. And it's not their fault that they don't look the way society doesn't want them to look. 'Cause I'm sure they're happier people because of it, because they transitioned. And Lake here is accepting the fact that she's Chrome, and that's not something that she's going to change. That is part of her identity. And that's like, and once she does that, once she accepts that she is a Chrome person, that is part of who she is right now, she can accept that, hey, I'm Lake. I can be who I want despite that. And I think that is the powerful thing that they're really getting across here, that like, it does, like, in just this like scene with like barely, like, they don't really like shine a light on it, but it shines through so well. This idea of like, Lake is being Lake despite her reflectiveness, like, but she's not ignoring it. She's not ignoring that that's part of her identity. She named herself Lake because of it. And I think that's really important and really powerful.
Yeah, and another thing from that scene of her reflecting the number, I think another important piece of that is the idea that without Jesse coming back, it's possible that Lake would have never left the train. But like because she has this ally that learned about
literally an ally.
Literally.
Yeah, literally an ally.
Like they got to know each other, they became friends, and at a very crucial time in MT's journey, he comes back to help her get past the barrier, that's what helps her move forward. Without him coming back, it's possible that kind of just stays there and she's stuck. And so that also kind of is an important piece of this in terms of, needing to accept the help when it's provided,
Oh, God. But also it's like allegorical for the sense of like she can't do it alone. Like she needs people who aren't her to like let her be herself, and it sucks. And I didn't make that connection, and I'm really glad you made that connection because that's awful. Like the more we dig into this, the more we talk about this, the more it's like, yeah, this is just an allegory for being queer, like 100%. Like there's not like. I don't think we're reading between the lines. This feels like it's just the lines of text.
I think that the train itself is going for a very systemic reading, but I do want to bring up this group of the Apets because they treat the Nulls very similarly in terms of not believing them to be people, saying they don't feel things, but they're not necessarily part of the train system. They somehow came to this conclusion. Like sort of, I mean, they're humans as well. They're sentient, so they came to this conclusion on their own, but they somehow came to the same conclusion as the system that surrounds them, even though the system is composed of Nulls. So, like, I wanted to get your guys' opinions on like how the relationship between the Apets and MT comes out in this situation. I don't know, Michelle, if you have any feelings about them.
I think the reason the Apex see Nulls as Nulls is because you can discern pretty quickly when you go through a train car. Like, you can go through a train car. Nulls can't. They're all specifically prescribed to their car, and they don't really move around. I mean, the cat kind of does.
But
some of them do. But some of them
that's not true. That's not true. We saw Lake go through cars before the season started. Like, this is just an outright lie. Sorry to interrupt.
It is a lie. The train is full of flaws, okay? But I think it is also true that if you're a Null and you think your place is in a car and you stay there, especially if it's specifically for like a puzzle for a passenger, and you're like, okay, well, I'm a Null. The purpose of me is to help them progress. Then you will stay in your car. And if you have more autonomy, you're smart like the cat is, you'll hop around and just do your own stuff sometimes. So I think like some Nulls stay, some Nulls like move around. They have different senses of maybe what they can do, and maybe that's everything right there. But like, I feel like that's part of why the group of humans is like, oh well, clearly, like if their purpose is to help us, or like they can't leave, then we're superior to them. Like if they're supposed to help us, then we're more important just based on that, you know?
Yeah, and there's so much because I think the train it tries to put forth this idea, or the Apex at least put forth this idea that Lake is literally there for Jesse, and one says that too.
Yeah.
And literally the train tries to say Lake's here for Jesse. And the fact is I call BS on that. Because it's just I think the train did pick out Lake as someone Jesse could relate to, someone he could talk to at some point. But I don't think the train worked this out and had Lake go through this journey up to the point she met Jesse to make her ready for Jesse. I think they just found a Null in their wording that fit what Jesse needed. And that's fair. That's what the train does. But it's you didn't make Lake do this. Lake's her own person. And Lake chose to help Jesse. And Lake is friends with Jesse, not because you pushed them together, but kind of in spite of it.
Yeah, I would agree in spite of it, because Alan Dracula shows a lot more signs of the classic Atticus companion animal than Lake ever did. She actively makes his number go up by getting him to fight with her and stuff, just because they're very different people.
It's just God, and Lake, even beyond that, she actively undermines him just because it's a struggle to know, does this change work if you know you're trying to do it? I think it's because, and I think it undermines it by you're here to make yourself better or something. And it's just by saying that, it kind of cuts out the knees of the train trying to teach Jesse a lesson, just knowing that he's being taught something. And it's Lake's doing this just because she wants to get him out of her life. And that's really obvious.
Yeah.
God, I don't know. This season's just kind of perfect, and I love it.
It's just got so much going on, and it's not holding back, and I just love that about it so much.
We were talking about the Apex, right, Alex?
Yeah, Apex,
well, right. But I mean, like with this whole idea of like the purpose of like even existing at all, like it's also important to throw in here episode 8, where the Sliver policeman also goes through this whole rigmarole of like, well, look, the car was there for Tulip, and you were there, so like in a way, that's how you were created because that car exists. So from the very beginning, and you can't escape this cycle, and that's a rough thing for a person of authority to say directly to you. But also, as we've already talked about, the train does express this in a lot of different ways. That this is all a cycle, and you should stick in the cycle.
I have a question about that, though.
Oh. Like, can I just say something about Mace?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say Mace is a liar, and like it's totally a choice.
Yeah, he's totally a liar. But also, okay, the Chrome car is not the only place that the mirrors exist. Because when Tulip was in the quote-unquote real world, and she didn't have a reflection anymore, that already implies that that world extends beyond that car to like the actual world. And this made me freak out, and I was trying to talk to work about it, but nobody knew either. It's like, either the train has made everything on this car, or some of those trains are portals to other worlds. Yeah. These things
it's pulling people in. It's kidnapping people almost.
That's true. That's an even bigger moral quandary, because like, you don't have the ownership of something that like can think for itself already. But if you made it in like an algorithm, you'd have a little more.
There's a more interesting moral question
like, there. Snatching things through a portal. So like, I don't know how much of the train is a portal and how much of it is code. But that is like another whole thing too. Like just deciding that passengers are more important than all this other life that might exist on other planets if they're portals. That is huge.
And then there's like the whole thing of like even extending through this, what you're saying is like the train, like the system extends past the physical train itself. We saw that in the Wasteland. Like we know that they
couldn't even run away. Isn't that scary? I think
that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Like I think that just implies that like the train is doing stuff in a lot of places, and its power and its like rules extend to not just the train cars themselves. And that's really scary and messed up. And I think it, again, fits this allegory we've been talking about.
Yeah. Before we drift off too much from the Apex, just a thing that I...
Did I talk about the Apex?
We began there, and we went along with...
we began a lot of places, Alex.
We're going to go...
Right, but...
We'll go back to the...
Just I do want to talk about Apex.
One additional thing I do want to bring up about them is that specifically the humans go for dehumanization of the Nulls and MT a lot more obviously than the train does, because like as I was rewatching, like it's the kids who say things like you're not real, you can't feel anything. Like Grace says, like Nulls can't feel anything. Like nobody in the system of the train denies that at least they have emotions, but the humans do, and that makes it a lot easier for them to treat them like garbage. So dehumanization of people who are different from you is a thing that, it happens a lot in real life. And the fact that the humans in this society, in this world, are the ones who do it and not the train is an interesting wrinkle to throw into it.
Yeah. I feel like the humans they're like making it into a much bigger deal, but the fact that anything the train considers to belong to it can't leave it, and that like MT couldn't leave the train until she technically had a number, and so I feel like that already means like not everything gets to have the same rules and the same privileges. I feel like it's like a much more subtle way of saying the same thing that Apex is maybe. Like, I feel like Apex takes it to a whole other level, right? But it still stems from something that the train sets up for us.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like where I'm going with this too, Michelle, where it's just like the train, in my head of in my, like, this allegory, it's like the train is like the government. Like the train is like saying like, here's the rules, here's the laws, and here's what we believe. And some of those things are inherently messed up or wrong morally. And I'm not going to go into like the real world ones I think are wrong, because that's a dangerous rabbit hole to go on a podcast. But I will say that like one of the things it does is it makes a lot of laws. Like we had like don't ask, don't tell, things like that. Like telling queer people that they should just not exist essentially. And they're not. And it's easy to say that those stances aren't inherently like the worst thing ever, but it's the people that live through them, the people that like the Apex that like bring those horrible things, like real life, like real painful things. Like it's annoying and it's frustrating that I have to pay like hundreds of dollars just to change my name and to prove to the government that my name's Sarah. But like, the government isn't messaging me on Twitter with death threats. Like, that's a totally different level of, like, emotional turmoil.
Yeah, and I guess that you're right that there's also something to the idea of systematic dehumanization, which isn't spelled out for you. But then the people...
No, you have to look at it, you have to find it.
But then there's the people who, because of the system that has been instituted, they feel more comfortable in being more direct about it.
Which is really interesting because, like, I feel so bad. I'm blanking on the really cool main girl in the
Grace?
Apex.
Grace?
Right? Is it Grace? Yes. So, because Grace tries so hard with Jesse to try to make him see MT as something that's not like him. And she gets him like, well, she doesn't even have a number. Like, she's not really a passenger. She's not like us. And it's like that's like the first step to try to being able to dehumanize people who are a little different, and seeing that difference is a bad thing that deserves to be like hurt and put down, you know, which also just feels very relevant.
The Apex, like this is like a lot of this season is like they go that first step and make that interesting comparison, and then they go like another step further and like make it like resonate, and it's just so good. I just can't get over it.
A real sad moment is when like it's like a little kid shows up to MT and it's like and just like, I'm not your prop, and they just like ha ha and just like laugh and run away. But like
and they even say like she kind of is, right? Because they're like, well, you're a Null, and we know what that means, and we don't have to listen to you, and we can just ridicule you. Like, they learned it from the older kids, and that's like, no! It's so, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a really great showing of how the system leads to this, because the train has taught them that this is true. And
they just take it even further, yeah.
Like, it's, again, just like, why shouldn't they think this is true? They have numbers, the Nulls don't. They have a life to look forward to, apparently. Like, the train was made to help them. Yeah. Why shouldn't they think that if the system is made to, like, to help them, if the system is made to give them this privileged position, why is it not true that they are better? And it's not right. It's not morally right in any way. But you can see how they got there. You can see how this happens. Mm-hmm. And this is like not like in our world, we have generation on generation. This is one generation. This is just people that have been here maybe a few years. And you can see how they get to this point. And it's horrifying. Right.
I do very much appreciate this show unequivocally is like, these are some bad people. Like, don't believe them and be on the side of MT and Jesse. Like, that's something that, I don't know, I feel like that's part of why I like it makes me so uncomfortable when it gets so real with these comparisons. But I also like I'm so glad that this show is like trying in a very not subtle way to lay out where it feels strongly about these things. And I'm like 100% for it being always on the side of MT and Jesse. And like,
and I think the show really does ride that line of like, I feel like the Apex are almost tragic. Like they're just like, cause the show is like, the show definitely gets across. Like these kids weren't like this. Like Grace is like pushing them in this direction, and it's awful.
And the train is like kind of like they're being punished by the fact that they've kind of like, you know,
they've embraced what the train is saying.
Yeah, they've dug their hole, and now they're just gonna be in that hole forever, and they didn't have to do that, but they chose to, and it's going to impact their life in other negative ways.
But no, but it's not negative in their opinion, because they're living a life that's good within this system. Like, they're living, even when they don't realize there could be a better version of what they have that doesn't incorporate this system.
Yeah, but like, also, like you said, it's probably been a couple of years. Like, I wonder how they're going to feel in like 40 years, you know? Like, I don't think everyone's going to be as happy and content as they are right now.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm saying, like, in the allegory, like, I'm just saying, like, along with the allegory, like, it gets hard when you start extending stuff like that to, like, keep it within, like, this metaphor we're having, which feels, again, still very accurate.
I don't know if anybody else wants to. I've kind of used up my APET stuff. I don't know if there's any extra points. If not, also, like, one piece that we can, like, dive into a little bit is also with the policemen. They introduce this system of, in the mirror world, at the end of somebody's death, you have to either lose your memories and become someone totally new, or you become part of the enforcement system. And that in itself is an additional wrinkle that I know on the first podcast, some people were critical of the lore they tried to add here. But I think, I think there's something here, primarily in at least for me, in episode 8, when he uses when the mace uses this idea of a reflection and then turns it on MT to, like, compare it to her relationship with Jesse, and be like, well, look, you know, you're kind of going back to being a reflection. So it's almost like gaslighting in a way where it's like it's using your old stats. And like, well, look, it's not that different, so just stay where you are, you know. And like that part, I think is where it's effectively used, this idea of going back to being a reflection.
Yeah.
I also think, like, the fact that there's only 2 options, right? Either you have to be law enforcement, or you have to mirror somebody else the rest of your life. You're never given the option of deciding what you want for yourself and to actually be your own person. Unless you're a police officer, but then you're still beholden to the mirror code or whatever. So I think that's really interesting too. There's literally only 2 options in your whole existence in this society, and either you're content with that or you're not. And I feel like MT gives her a really, like, obviously she's done so much more outside of that system than she ever did in it, and she hated being in the system the whole time. So I feel like that's just really strong too on its own.
Yeah. And I just like how, like, this whole season is about how different people make that choice or think they are forced into a choice. Like, that's what every character here is. That's what everyone, like, the whole season's built on that. Jesse thinks he has a choice because he thinks he has to be with these boys, be like the other boys, like, be involved in toxic masculinity. And he learns that he doesn't have to. He learns he doesn't have to be that person. And the thing that from Lake's past that she has to learn about, which she's already made that choice, unlike Jesse, is that you can choose to be, like, you can choose to not be a cop. You can choose to be somebody who just forgets everything and keeps being essentially, I think that the allegory here is supposed to be like, you can either choose to keep being a kid or, quote unquote, grow up. You know what I mean? Grow up into being like just what everyone's supposed to be. Like, you're supposed to be someone who enforces this, or you
enforces
can just,
the society you're born into.
Yeah. And I think that that's a little looser, because I think the whole mirror stuff's a little loose, but I feel like that's like the closest thing in my brain that works. Like, they're kind of saying like, hey, you can either be one of the kids who just does whatever in the mirrors for forever and keep doing this over and over again, or you can actually, like, be strong and be a cop and keep people from doing what you're doing. But it's like the fact that they have these people doing this implies that a lot of people don't like it. Yeah, don't like either of these choices.
So true. That's so true. There's no other job than being a police officer if you're not mirroring somebody else's life. That's such a good point.
Yeah, and then, like, but it's, again, implies that people are escaping. People are trying to do other things because they want to. They want to be their own people.
Yeah.
And like, they keep, like, the cops keep trying to tell Lake that, like, she doesn't have a choice, that no one else is going to do this. I don't know. I just don't know how.
Well, I think that's another important piece, right? That they try to convince, like, that she is alone, totally. Because, like, I think that if you read the show at face value, I don't know if we actually know any other reflections like have actually done this, and MT is being treated like one of the first. But like at the same time, that could just be Mace and the other policemen like doing their best to corner MT and make her feel as alone as possible, and that being enough to dissuade her. And that is also a thing that people have to deal with, and especially when they're in smaller communities. Like, for example, the train. Like, the train is a very enclosed community. So, like, if you don't know anybody with your own circumstances, then that just makes the battle all the more harder to fight through. And that is a common tactic used by people in authority to, like, make you seem as inconsequential as possible.
That's a really good point. I hadn't considered that Mace's whole language towards MT, it is doing what you're saying, Alex. It is trying to make her feel like she's alone in this, and this is so radical, and why is she doing it? But then again, they have a universe word. Sliver is the name for people who do what she's doing, which implies a lot of people have done it enough for them to have a nickname for it. And I mean, I also think Mace's attitude is like, he's done this a million times and she's just one more to him that he's going to catch. Like, I don't think he's ever not caught someone until her too. But yeah, like Sarah was saying, like so many of them have clearly tried and hate how it is. And that's like, oh man, it's a lot and I love it. It's a lot though.
It's a lot. It's like this show is getting into some very deep things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, I think we're beginning to get to a natural ending point here, but like, I don't know if there's any major, pieces that you guys still want to bring up before we begin signing off. Michelle, I'll go to you first if there's anything in particular. We have like a internal list here of things to potentially talk about. I don't know if there's anything, there's anything off of there you feel like bringing up before we go away.
I think just as we were talking, like, there does seem to be kind of a progression because MT starts off just right, like not wanting to be too old. Like that was her goal. And then after that, she's trying to figure out like how she wants to present, what her name's going to be, and just to prove she's a person. And I think it's interesting that like first she has to fight the mirror police and then like get past them saying that she can't, that this is just the way things are and there aren't any more options for her and this will never end well. And then like she takes that to the train itself because she has that really good line of saying like she doesn't care what the train is doing or why, but like she's deciding that she's a person and that she's going to have a different life and she's going to do whatever it takes to get there. Like she's so determined. Like she's not going to take no from an answer from anybody, like not the police, not from the train. And the fact that she is able to reflect Jesse's number and get off, like, implies that this is a very, like, if we didn't already think so, like, this is a very flawed system that the train is set up to determine things about people. And if she can get off, like, why can't everyone get off? You know? So I love everything it's set up, and I'm just very happy that she gets to do life on her own terms now. Like that seems like the main goal of the season. And she got it. Like it was a triumphant ending, all things considered, and like I'm so glad that it was.
Yeah, for sure. The journey to being accepted as a person is a very meaningful thing, and I think that it happens as naturally as possible in this season. Sarah, any extra points you want to bring up here before we sign off?
I'll try to keep it brief because I brought this up on like the queer like representation pod for 2019 that like I wanted to do a pod about this like before this season came out. Like I've wanted to do this pod because identity has been a theme in a lot of shows, not just animated, but just animation has a lot of themes about this and it doesn't dive into it a lot, but usually it's queer coded and for good reason because having to figure out your identity is inherently a queer thing to do. Like you have to figure out who you are. And it's just like this show, and we didn't end up talking about really anything else because this season kind of ended up being everything I could have wanted. Like, I just want to be clear. Like I wanted to do this pod originally because I wanted to talk about like everything. Like I wanted to talk about how Steven like has to struggle with if he's Rose or not in Steven Universe. That's a really trans thing. Like I wanted to talk about like Chase and Val from Genlock because their struggles are really real, and like more currently, like Penny is like kind of going through like trans stuff in terms of wanting to feel like a real girl. But like this show just kind of like took all of that, and without like being overtly queer, it took all the struggles of those characters and said, see, these are just normal life things. It just happens that queer people see it through a lens of their queerness on top of that. Like these are not like, they're showing that this is not like these struggles that we have are not fake or like made up. Like they're real. It's just unfortunately that because I can put a label on it, like all the other labels that people put on them, that like it becomes fake because of that. Like because I'm mad that the government's doing one thing, because it's about my transness, it's fake. Even though any other situation where it's like, yeah, the government's being kind of messed up by doing this. Like, and it just shows that I wish it was more explicit, but again, I'm not mad at the show. I'm not mad at the creators because like this is just so well done, and I really, really like this season.
And again, this show's rated PG, which is actually a lot younger. I thought it was going to be like 14 or something.
You could have fooled me with some of the stuff that happened.
I know, you could have like, she murders Mace. I did not think there was going to be such an intense murder. If Infinity Train has taught me anything, is that anything's on the table. Surprises galore.
We're going to murder the frog next season.
No, don't say that. He needs to get off the train too. But like this is for a younger audience than I was expecting, and I think again, like Sarah was saying, like that is so important in terms of like being able for kids earlier in life to start thinking about things and the kind of people they want to be, and being willing to step outside of what society might be telling them, and being able to discern if society is harming them or other people by saying things should be a certain way. So I'm just really happy we're here, and I'm really happy this season's so good.
I just want to make sorry, because you touched on it, I just want to say, like, I really like the frog because the frog is like story, like condensed really short. Like, I want to make sure that's clear. Like also, sorry, he's a toad, and his name's Terrence. His name is Terrence, and Terrence, like, his journey is Lake's journey, like, squished down to, like, 2 episodes, and I really, in the background, and I think that's on purpose, and I think that's really cool. Like, he seems happier where he is because he got to choose what he's doing. Like, they show that, like, I think it's a little on the nose, but he's like, because I got to choose to get kicked, I'm okay with it. I was upset because you forced me to do this. It wasn't on my terms. And I still think that, like, it's a little on the nose and it's a little messed up that he's still getting kicked, but I think it's still evocative and still shows that, like, this is it. And also, sorry, Alex, I want to say that names-wise, like, I really think that they captured how naming yourself can be, because it can feel, like, really insurmountable, like, choosing your name. Like choosing Sarah, like before it was just like really hard. Like I had to build up to it and be like, I had to choose it. And then the actual choosing is kind of just this like cathartic release, like just really simple and really easy. Like it's not this big explosive moment. And I really like that they captured that.
With Lake, when she's just like,
when she's just like, my
water,
name's Lake.
She's like, my name's Lake, that's it. I figured it out.
Like that's it. There's not like there's usually a lot more build up to the changes than the actual change themselves.
Yeah, that's I like hearing that perspective on it. One thing I wanted to comment with regards to, like, you mentioned, like, other shows that deal with this. I think what makes Infinity Train special is that its main character and the thing it's focused on is its search for personhood. As much, I mean, I agree that we should make time to talk about other shows and their dealings with identity. But like Steven Universe, that's a part of his character. But we got like 3 other main characters and a bunch of others. Well, Genlock, like Val is a piece of the main cast. And Penny, also. But, like, this show... I mean, like,
I think Chase struggles with it, too. Like, Chase struggles with it through the end of the season without getting into too many spoilers.
I think
like, Chase
is the closest to Infinity Train. But my point is that, like, Infinity Train is important in that, like, how much effort they dedicate to this storyline.
Yeah.
And but I don't want to, like, say, like, these themes are big. Like, the Steven theme specifically, like, it was the focus of Change Your Mind that he is his own person.
That's true.
Like, that... Like, and I think that, but at the same time, you're right. These are not nearly as big a part of the show as Lake is a part of Infinity Train. But still, like, these are still big themes and big parts of the other shows. And, like, just the ones we've mentioned are not the only ones. Like, there's 12 Forever, which we haven't mentioned. just off the top of my head. Like, I'm sure there's more I'm forgetting. That there are a lot, like, there's a lot of anime that I know that I know that Michelle and I are thinking of. But yeah, there's a lot of shows that do this, and it's just a very common story because finding yourself is a very human thing to go through.
And I think it's a story that many of us on the podcast relate to in some capacity or another, and that's why we feel passionately about talking about it for almost an hour. And we hope that if you guys are listening to it, that you've enjoyed this discussion as well. If you'd like us to have more of these kinds of discussions, feel free to leave us comments. Whether you're listening to this on YouTube, you can come to our Discord at overlyanimated.com/Discord, or wherever you're listening to us. We'd appreciate any comments on how this discussion went and what other shows you'd like us to have this particular kind of discussion about. Since I do agree with you, Sarah, that there's a lot of different shows that we could dig into stuff like this about. But yeah, let us know in the comments like how you felt about this. If you enjoyed this kind of discussion, also we would appreciate if you could support us financially any way you could via Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to all of our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Taylor, aka Needle. Hi, Needle.
Oh, this is a perfect one for Needle. I hope Needle enjoys this one.
You better listen, Needle.
Thanks as always to our Patreon executive producers, Ryan, Steve, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, and Needle. Besides this discussion, we have covered a lot of different new shows coming out in 2020. Besides Infinity Train, we've talked a little bit of Owl House, we've talked Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts, we talked a little bit about the Weathering with You movie. So there's a lot of stuff for 2020. As mentioned, we are in the midst of a format change where we are hoping to do more of these specific topic discussions on top of overall show recaps. So again, let us know what other kinds of topics you'd like us to dig into, and let us know what you thought about this podcast. But yeah, until next time when we talk about other shows, thanks for listening, and we'll see you later. Goodbye.
Bye.